Linda Moulton Howe.
Hi, Mike.
We have you back in Manchester, UK.
Yes, I really am glad to be here. I love this city.
And it's we're only 2 days away from the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11.
I know. It's hard to believe, actually. And I think in my own work, that what has been unfolding for me since 2017 have been whistleblowers that have been coming from a variety of directions, but the two most significant have been U.S. Navy SEALs. I know their background, I've seen their documents, I know photos, I know places that they have been. And when one sits in front of me, as I'm going to share in Awakening, and says, I have seen the photographs of humanoids that are based in Antarctica, and that what he has seen with his own eyes 2 miles down under ice are hieroglyphs that archaeologists that he was in, that was the mission, was a scientist had been in there studying all this ancient archaeology 2 miles down under the ice. And the Navy SEAL gets to walk one of these huge rooms, 9-acre rooms, ceilings. One SEAL tells me he's been there in 2012. The SEAL that I have been able to videotape, voice altered in background, he was there in 2004. So I have two completely different SEALs. They're describing exactly the same kind of architecture. Black basalt, symbols that the archaeologist, that the 2003 Navy SEAL, his task was to go in and do what the SEALs call extract. That's when they have somebody who is there on mission and the SEALs come to get them out, to take them someplace else. So he got to talk with this archaeologist at great length. And he said that the archaeologist compared thousands. We're not talking a few symbols. We're talking whole walls, 40 feet high, completely covered with symbols that the archaeologist says are somewhere in between Mayan and Egyptian and are neither. And that they took an instrument and they penetrated where all these thousands of symbols are, and they all go in 7 centimeters, which is about 3.5 inches. But they're thin, they're carved into this dense black basalt on an even 7 centimeters. And the SEAL said to me, in discussing with the scientist, we can't even comprehend how you would do this unless there is something that interacts literally with the molecular level of the basalt and turns it into these very refined, evenly deep symbols. The SEAL said that when you would walk into these big 9-acre rooms, they can't see supports. So imagine that you're in a 9-acre room and you're looking, there's a ceiling, but there are no supports. The SEAL who was there in 2012 independently has his own unbelievable story that I'm sharing at Awakening. Mm-hmm. He said that he was in a space and they knew by measurement of what they were doing from satellite that the ceiling was at least 80 feet high, no supports. Both SEALs tell me the same thing, that the conclusion is that the very material of which the ceilings are made is neutralizing gravity, self-activating software neutralizing gravity. It's not something that the human mind is used to seeing or even comprehending.
Is this definitely ET then, and not an ancient civilization?
Ask him the same question, both. And they both say, we're not dealing at all with anything human. We are dealing with ancient extraterrestrial interactions with this planet going back probably millions of years, and this is another important part of my presentation for the awakening. When you ask the question, when was the last time that Antarctica was free of ice? The consensus in terms of geophysics is that you have to go back to at least 34 million years ago. There was a period around 14 million years ago where it might have heated up and become drier and then gone back to ice. But the big division is 34 to 33 million years ago. And what had been happening for the previous 70 million. That is the disconnect from Pangea, when all of the land was all hooked together, and a portion that became this roundish Antarctica starts coming down for at least 70 million years, moving south. The whole time, for at least 70 million and probably longer, the entire moving Pangea continent that we know as Antarctica was tropical. The pollens, the seeds, it's all tropical, high temperature land. Until, and it's a huge mystery what happened between 34 million and 33 million years ago. And that is when ice began rapidly to build up to 2 miles and in a few places 3 miles on this round continent. So the question that both seals said to me, could 62-acre sites, half a dozen of them, that are now 2 miles under ice. The 2012 seal got there by going in on a submarine, coming out, and said to him, one of the most astonishing things is that they came out of the submarine into what looked like a molded piece.
How did they know where to look?
Oh, we're dealing with ice penetrating, ground penetrating radar. We know a lot about what is 2 miles and 3 miles down. It isn't being shared with the public, but our government and probably other governments know quite a bit.
Did they say that there's ever military from other countries there as well, or is it pretty much America that's...
In terms of the seals, they would come, the Spartan 1 in the video that I'm sharing at Awakening, they came into McMurdo. They came in on aircraft carrier, launches a helicopter. The helicopter goes to McMurdo. They get on half tracks. They go up toward the Beardmore Glacier, and that is the jump off to how they get to this deep underground through an octagonal structure. The other Navy SEAL who was there in 2012, he's the one who came in on a submarine to this 2 mile deep entrance. And he said that it was astonishing that as they come out, most submarines, if they're that deep, there has to be some sort of a decompression airlock thing. And he said the whole structure, they came in on the submarine, and when they move, just like the SEAL from 2004, 3-4, the walls move with you with light, that the temperature stays between 68 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit, that they have looked for the energy source. They cannot find anything that has wires. There's nothing that we would recognize, and yet, if it is 33 to 34 million years old, it is still sustaining a structural integrity with temperature, with pressure. And he said, when you realize that you're in a place, I'm walking, that's what Spartan 1 told me. He said, I am walking, it takes me 15 minutes to walk from one end of one room to the other. This is how big the structures are. And he said, you have light that is moving with you, you have this even temperature, you're looking up at ceilings and there is no structure that is going up. And they are maybe 33 to 34 million years old.
Are these crafts or buildings?
Well, maybe, but the idea is that these structures would be what our government has described in extraterrestrial investigations for a long time, self-activating software. That we are dealing with advanced intelligences that know how to take a wall, put in at the atomic level programming, just like we would do software in a computer, only they're doing it with structure. And both of the SEALs said, if you think about 2 miles of ice on any structure that humans could make on the Earth, it would not sustain 2 miles of ice. It would collapse. SEAL Spartan 1, who was there in August of 2003, he says that when you know that you are 2 miles down and you're looking at these ceilings that have no support structures, he said it's incomprehensible to the human mind when you know where you are and you know how much weight there is above. And therefore, the ceilings have to be some kind of self-activating software that are sustaining because they are neutralizing gravity, and there must be some change in the physics between these deep structures and all of the ice. Sort of in a way that the existence of these structures to the SEALs who have been there are living evidence of something that is not comprehensible to them.
How does it affect them, that? How do they process? Have they struggled with this experience?
Well, they both have said the same thing to me. And it's one of the reasons why Spartan 1 did the video interview with his colleague, who is a Marine, Spartan 2. He said, when I was there to extract that scientist, and I'm looking at all of these symbols in this dark, dark volcanic basalt, walking 15 minutes from one end of one quote-unquote room to another, each of the facilities 62 acres, 6 at least that he knew of. He said to me, Linda, why shouldn't every human on the surface of this planet know about what we are going to in a military way that's 2 miles under ice in Antarctica? And that is the everyman question. If this exists, why? What would be any possible reason for why humanity on the surface of this planet should not be told everything there is to know and show about huge architecture deep under the ice of Antarctica? Why? What is it that our government and other governments know that they don't want the surface life to know? Okay, go another step. Spartan 1, his Marine colleague, the other SEAL, they've all been exposed to this same information. They have been shown photographs that the exact same symbols that are carved in that basalt in Antarctica, they have seen photographs that we have taken on Mars, and they have seen photographs that have been taken on an interior base on the moon. And they say all of the symbols match. The implication is what I've been told by a Defense Intelligence Agency analyst in December of 1999, a meeting that took an entire month to set up. All of us had to travel. There were 3 people, including myself, and the whole goal of that meeting had to do with information that I had in Glimpses Volume 2, my 3rd book, about what abductees call resurrection technology. And these are illustrations by half a dozen people who are abductees who say that there are cloning technologies that will sustain cloned bodies inside of light, and that these are used in technologies by non-humans to access a camouflage of a human body, that by doing these clones that they can become conscious beings that move around on the earth and humans would never know. That particular work in Glimpses Volume 2 was of great interest to the man who set this meeting up with me that took a month. I know because I saw his credentials, I saw his ID card. He worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency. And when we had this meeting in December of 1999, it went on for 7 hours. And he said, my job, working for the Defense Intelligence Agency for 23 years, so 99 minus 23, when he began, was to monitor and analyze the conflicting competition of 3 extraterrestrial biological civilizations in conflict with each other on and apparently over something about this planet. In that context, in talking to me, he said these words, Linda, our government has proof that 3 competing extraterrestrial civilizations have been using this planet as a laboratory for genetic manipulation for at least 270 million years. I asked him what the proof was. He said it would be too dangerous for me to tell you. And I said, well, 270 million years is before the time of the dinosaurs. And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, one of the 3 competing groups made the dinosaurs as an 80 million plus year long experiment. And he said, the part that bothers us, we think it was the ebens, the ones with the heads that are shaped like this and a pear-shaped chin, not this, but more this. He said, the ebens have demonstrated for us, meaning humans, in DIA, CIA, NSA, military, and intel, that they can move matter in this universe into another dimension or another timeline, and they do it all of the time. He said 66 million years ago, something was headed for this planet that was 6 miles in diameter. We call it an asteroid. Was it an asteroid? Were they responsible for it? He said, because it is that 6 mile wide, what we have called this a scientific analysis, that it must have been an asteroid piece, 6 miles in diameter, and it plunges into what we call the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of the Yucatan and makes the Chicxulub crater. That's our evidence. He said, we just can't understand. That took out 95% of surface life on Earth, including all of the dinosaurs. If this was their experiment, they could have moved that 6 mile diameter object into timeline or another dimension, and there never ever would have been any collision. Mm-hmm. And he said, so what bothers us? What else can we conclude? But they did an 80 million plus year experiment, dinosaurs. And then, is this the way they ended it? By taking out 95% of all Earth surface life. And when he said that, he knows that he is talking to one of the few investigative reporters ever on the planet who investigated animal mutilations, coming to another question where we meet in an intersection. Why would extraterrestrial biological entities, which is a government phrase, no matter what they look like, no matter what their source, whether there's 5 here or 105, why for at least a century would they take an ear, eye, jaw flesh, tongue, genitals, and 99% of the rectal area is cored out, all over this planet since at least the early 1960s? No blood, no fluid at the excisions, and the part that has baffled law enforcement in every hemisphere and country. How can it be done and there's no tracks around the body? When I say that, I mean there's no tracks of the animal that is found lying on its side with these excisions of tissue. And that is why law enforcement always said, whatever we're dealing with, it is coming from above, it is taking the animals from the pasture where they are found, it is taking them someplace else, doing the excisions, then returning the animal not bleeding back somewhere near where it was picked up. And that is why a sheriff said to me in 1979, Linda, the perpetrators of the worldwide animal mutilations are creatures from outer space.
We've got so much evidence, Linda, with ancient artifacts around the world, UFO sightings, the cattle mutilations, the discoveries in Antarctica. What is it going to take for the general public to actually take note? Is Antarctica going to be the key that unlocks the door, do you think? A discovery that becomes more commercially viable over the next couple of years?
I am personally convinced that the answer to your question is that there has to be a complete philosophical makeover of all government, military, and political, we'll call them power brokers on this planet. They've got to do a 180-degree that says lying perpetually as policies of denial about the presence of other life forms on this planet, based on this planet, underground, based on the moon, based on Mars, and probably throughout the solar system and beyond. That to have had, at least since 1947, official policies in the United States that were reflected by our World War II allies, England, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, that the public is to be lied to for the foreseeable future, and that is the way they speak. The public and the media at all costs are to know nothing about the presence of extraterrestrials on this planet and throughout the solar system. 47 to 97 to 2007 to 2019. We're still on a planet in which the so-called power brokers are treating the mass of humanity as if we were 2-year-olds that cannot be told the truth. And there can be only one reason to me why this would be perpetuated today. And that is because there is a 0.5% of the power brokers on this planet that are making all kinds of barter system profit. The SEALs tell me they know firsthand. We have interstellar trade. We are working with ally extraterrestrials and have been since the 1970s. Interstellar trade. Your own UK citizen, Gary McKinnon, back in 2001, when he made this announcement that he had stumbled into our computer networks, which were not safe and apparently protected at that time in the United States, and he saw spreadsheet, non-terrestrial pilots lists. Clearly, he stumbled into something that relates to exactly what the Navy SEALs and others are telling me in 2019. interstellar trade routes. And when I said, well, what would we, humans, Homo sapiens sapien on planet Earth, what would we be trading? And the answer was, you, meaning Earth, you need rare metals. We're running out of rare metals. We're running out of helium on Earth. There's a vast galaxy here, and we are collaborating with non-humans who know how to go to X, Y, and Z and bring us what we need, and that they are interested in some of the technologies that humans make on Earth, and it goes to them. Suddenly, the reason for why the power brokers of Earth would have any incentive in 2019 to keep this from the planet begins to emerge. Profit.
How important are whistleblowers to mankind?
In my professional life, and I started getting into this whole issue of what kind of alien intelligence could be interacting with our planet. That was in 1979 when I started working on the documentary A Strange Harvest about the animal mutilations. It was clear to me within 1 month of going to sites of these animals, and there's no blood, there's no fluid, there's no tracks. You cannot investigate real animal mutilations for a month and come away and say that there's any possibility of humans doing this. The government would like everybody to buy into their mantra that it's predator, disease, or satanic cults. I went to a Catholic priest. He was doing exorcisms for a large church in Denver, Colorado. I asked him if he would come to my office, and I laid out maybe 50, 60 photographs of various mutilated animals. And I asked him, I said, sir, would you look at these photographs and tell me if you have seen any of this in satanic cult rituals? And the priest who did exorcisms for that Catholic diocese, he looked at all the photographs and he turned to me and he said, no, none of this. I said, why? He said, when you're dealing with satanic cults, you're dealing with blood, and lots of blood. You're showing me photograph after photograph, there's no blood. He said, that's not what I deal with. But the governments of this planet have tried to reduce the animal mutilations to predators, disease, or satanic cults. The one subject that even the DIA, the guy who met with me for 7 hours, told me all kinds of knowledge from his point of view about the relationship of varying competing ETs who had manipulated DNA in already evolving primates to create Homo sapien in all of the varieties we know, from Homo erectus, standing up for the first time in Africa 2 million years ago, all the way through Denisovan and Neanderthal and now to us. Why were we made to replace Neanderthal? And if the seals are right, if this huge, multiple site 2 miles under ice in Antarctica, and in one place 3 miles deep, if the last time that it could have been constructed at that size was before the ice buildup that started 33 to 34 million years ago, does that mean that this architecture has been functioning for 34 million years with non-humans coming and going or not? And that when we finally, through World War II and Adolf Hitler's obsession with extraterrestrials from Aldebaran, that he wanted to make blonde, blue-eyed, white-skinned beings be the dominant population of the earth, and that's why he did killings that were abhorrent to every human mind. And then animal mutilations. The track of all of that through that DIA analyst to me in December of 1999 was the key to understanding this planet, the non-human intelligences that have warred with each other over this planet. It's a laboratory. He said, it's my understanding so far there are not many planets like this. We're 2/3 water, deep, deep water, with land that was congealed. That's what Pangaea and Gondwanaland was about. And then over a period of time, because of dynamics with the geophysical interior of this planet, that the lands began to break up and go into the separate lands that we know. But if there are competing civilizations that move their way through the Milky Way galaxy and the universe by collecting whatever is the genetic material of life forms so that they can make it in cloned containers that they then can use to put themselves into any planet, anywhere, camouflaged by that life form, then one of the biggest treasures. It's hard for humans to think about this, but when you get to this bigger picture, the biggest treasure would always be retrieving genetic material that could be preserved to make clones for whatever would be the reason. And that man that night, December of 1999, said this planet is considered a laboratory. It has perfect conditions, and these conditions do not exist everywhere. 3 competing, these were his words, 3 competing extraterrestrial biological civilizations conflicting in this planet, all of them doing genetic experiments. Would that explain why, in the evolution of standing up primates on Earth, that if you go back, say, 35, 45,000 years, and you come to the overlap with Neanderthal, one of the questions he posed, he said the Ebens said that they are surprised that there are 5 main different races, because they did, this was the quote, they didn't start their experiment out to end up with 5 different genetic populations. So how did that happen? And his answer to me in December of 1999 was, we are beginning to understand that in the competing civilizations, they will do genetic manipulations in the same populations of a preceding group. And therefore, none of the 5 or 3 that would be involved in the beginning would have complete control over what had happened. They started experiments, other things came, and he was basically describing for me that night. I remember driving back to Philadelphia from where I had traveled, thinking, we are on a planet in which humans war and kill each other over the color of their skin, whose God is superior to another's God. And what that man just revealed to me on December of 1999 is that all of these differences were set in motion by competing extraterrestrial groups, and we humans are left in the dark, not only by those genetically manipulating, we are left in the dark by our own human power brokers. And this is why, in 2019, I have come to see all of my work for the last 40 years trying to get to the bottom of all this. It is a story of abuse of humanity.
I agree with that, Linda. I'm conscious of time, Linda, and we're coming to a very special date in the calendar, Saturday the 20th of July 2019. It's the 50th anniversary of mankind's greatest achievement, so they say. So, Linda, please tell me everything you know about NASA and Apollo 11. You must have met lots of interesting characters when it comes to the moon landing.
I've interviewed a lot of astronauts.
Tell me everything you know.
I think one of the most surprising revelations to me in my career was talking to a good friend of Neil Armstrong. And I was the supervising producer on what was a TV series in the United States. And when we started laying out what we were going to do, I wanted to try to interview as many astronauts as I could, and I set out to do this. And the one at the top of my list was Neil Armstrong. Now, I thought that it would be simple getting a hold of astronauts. And this was for the series Sightings, where I was working with people at Paramount, and the distributor would be Fox. And it actually, what I'm describing, was broadcast in October of 1991. So these were big boxes in Hollywood, Paramount and Fox. You would think that I, as the supervising producer of the Sighting series, that I could call anybody and say, I am trying to get a hold of Neil Armstrong to do an interview, and constantly it was, he just does not do interviews. He does not talk. It became puzzling to me. This was the first man from the Earth, in terms of how he became known to the world, to step on the surface of the moon. Why would he be inaccessible? So that really kept me going. And finally, there was a source who said, I know one of his best friends. They were pilots together. And he said, I can get you a meeting with his best friend. So within a short period of time, it was one of those where you meet somebody at a restaurant to sit down to try to, for me, was what is the mystery about that Neil Armstrong is hidden and not interacting with the planet. And this pilot, we'll call him the pilot friend, he said, remember the big New York ticker tape parade when they got back from the moon and we'd all seen the NASA footage? He said, I called him up. We were the best of friends. And I said, Neil, I wanted to just come and sit down and talk with you about this. And he said, he sounded depressed. It was not like my old friend. I was really confused in the phone call. But he said, come. And he said that night his family was out. He was alone in the house. And he said, and when I got there, instead of, you would think, you know, he was looking at the ground. He wasn't looking at my eyes. He asked me into the front door. I said, Neil, what's wrong? And he said, the house was dark. There was just a dim light here and there. Neil Armstrong took him into a living room, motioned to a place for him to sit, and Neil Armstrong sort of sunk into, it's the way he said it, a sofa where somebody just collapses and they're kind of crunched And he said, I asked him again, what is wrong? And he said that Neil Armstrong, looking at the floor, not at him, said, remember the dust? And what he meant was, when the LEM was coming down, there was a moment where NASA comes in and says, people can go back and watch this. There are rocks, and they're having to turn the lander. And you see smoke in the window, not smoke, dust. That night, the pilot says, when he asked this to Neil Armstrong, and Neil says, remember the dust? He said, I had to turn because there were 3 huge silver discs right on the border of the crater that would have gone to the whole world. When the pilot said that that night they talked, he talked in more detail, but he said he realized that his old pilot friend just didn't have it in him to go out like a quote-unquote, he said, like a monkey on a chain, to interact with the world that was being kept completely in the dark about what clearly the astronauts had been exposed to, the United States government knew, UK all the way going back to World War II. It's very clear that Churchill and Eisenhower knew that there was something in the skies that they couldn't understand and did maneuvers that they couldn't duplicate. And that Neil Armstrong was so honest that the idea that he would go out and do a show, it would be a show, it would be theatrical, and he was not an actor, and so he chose to pull himself back from public displays on purpose because he couldn't stomach it. And that pilot explained to me everything that went right up to Neil Armstrong's passing in just the most recent time, when people were going back and saying, why did he disappear after July of 1969 and the ticker tape parade? That was the last big public display. And that pilot, that night in Los Angeles, when I was working on sightings, I think explained the truth. And I share that because to me that is a metaphor for everything that is wrong now on planet Earth. The disconnect between the power brokers, the politicians, and the governments that have allied themselves or aligned themselves in policies of denial and lies since World War II at least, from a population around this planet in 2 hemispheres in which every year people are encountering lights, beams, sometimes entities in their house or their farm, animal mutilations. And we are living then on a planet that is totally concocted. Everything about this is now concocted. The past mythologies, even past religions, are part of a kind of theatrical explanation for what the truth is. That this planet, this solar system, this moon, Mars, and beyond, as that man said to me that night, December of 1999, our planet has had 3 competing extraterrestrial civilizations for at least 270 million years.
There's a thing, last question is, Linda, something huge on social media at the moment, hashtag Raid Area 51. Have you signed up to the group, Linda?
No, I understand
Come
the
on,
whole
Linda.
the whole thing is somebody's ruse and hoax. But
What would happen if it happened?
Exactly. And how many people, upon seeing that headline, that 400,000 people were signing up to try to overwhelm Area 51. It's not possible. They are prepared for Russia, China, anybody, right? No, nobody is going to storm Area 51. But here is the part that people should pay attention to. How many of you, myself included, upon seeing that headline, didn't go, yes, it's not going to happen that way. But the metaphor is Area 51, China Lake, Wright-Patterson, the list goes on and on. They have been part of the policy of denial and cover-up since at least World War II, if not since 1941. And there is the major disconnect. How many people, and the whistleblowers that have been coming to me for quite a while, because they live it. They get into a special ops, and then they know they're seeing photographs or they're face to face with non-humans. And then they step back and say to me, they come to me, say, for example, because I am an investigative reporter and I'm always trying to be guided by the pressure of fact. I want fact, I would like evidence. And they come to me to say, I have seen ETs. I have encountered, like Fravor, the UFO coming through to the Stars Academy that ended up on the the front page and the upper half of the New York Times back on December 16th, 2017. That was a big day. That was a big headline, and it began what feels like an effort by some people in control who are trying to say, if we come into this through the pilots, and the pilots are saying that what they are seeing on infrared are doing maneuvers at speeds, 90-degree angles, and perfect stops that a human body could not sustain. And that's what the Navy pilots have said. So maybe right now, as we are almost the last half of 2019, 2020 has always been another one of those big decade markers. I personally will be very surprised if by January 1st, 2020, we haven't gotten something like that headline that we have all deserved as a species for at least 35,000 years, if not a million years. We are not alone in this universe. We never have been. And here's the most important part. Every military and intel whistleblower I have ever communicated with, the remote viewers who remote viewed for the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA, we have allies, there are neutrals, and there are hostiles. And the hostiles, for reasons that are not clear, would like to annihilate surface life on Earth. Probably in the old battles that the DIA guy told me have been raging for 270 million years over this laboratory. But hang on to the fact that we have allies. And one man working in a military unit who has dealt with ETs said, those allies have kept humanity alive. And as we go into the future, if all the people in every country of this planet were told the truth, the whole truth, and it is put in the box that we have allies that have cared about us, maybe even felt sorry for us as a manipulated, genetically created species. They have been protecting us. And the SEALs and everybody says, as far as we know, Linda, we have allies. And they have protected us from more things than anybody would believe. And as long as you look into the future, Spartan 1 said, those allies are going to help us, and we should all know the truth.
Have you watched any of the episodes of Unidentified with Tom DeLonge?
I'm aware.
They seem to be using the word threat quite a lot, which is a bit disturbing after about 3 shows. What's your take on that? Because it seems a little bit suspicious now to me.
Well, I know Lou Elizondo and Tom DeLonge and that group. I like them. Steve Justice, who came out of Lockheed, very, very intelligent, wonderful human. I think that the threat aspect is there. Maybe you would say that TTSA evolved because there was a change in Pentagon psychology. We have to move from a policy of denial and lies. And how do we do it with China, Russia, other countries on the earth, so that we begin telling the public the truth? But we have to protect our military interests. And that, as the remote viewers have said, as the military whistleblowers have said, if you have allies, neutrals, and threats, all 3 are there ever present, then a question to every military mind on this planet: when do the hostiles become stronger than the allies?
On the Unidentified, they had a pilot, a serving pilot, and he's telling these wonderful stories. How can he keep his job after that? Because he's pretty much just come out and said it. He's a whistleblower out in the open now. I'm curious, how does that work in America?
Okay. David Fravor was the pilot who was doing the Tic Tac video, the FLIR. I interviewed him, and he said that what they were watching to any pilot, you cannot have something that is moving at a few thousand miles an hour, stop on a dime, do 90-degree turns, and say there's a human pilot in there. The physics and the biology, the biology would die. So that was the first thing that caught 22-year long career. A Navy pilot who is watching in infrared motions that he knows cannot be a human pilot in a normal vehicle in the sky. He was not the only one. There have been pilots going from World War II on who saw all kinds of extraordinary things. So the pilots, by training and definition, would be the first ones on the line who would be reporting to their superiors. Here's what happened. This cannot be us. What is it? In that context, a policy of denial from FDR to Truman began. When you look back at that period of history that led into, between World War I and World War II, the whole planet was more agitated. World War II comes, and all of these strange unidentified area vehicles are still being reported by pilots. I can sort of understand how from FDR to Truman, they would have said, let's not talk about this until we understand what we are dealing with. I can sort of understand that. When General Eisenhower became president, he knew probably the most of anybody on the planet. he made some kind of a policy decision to extend Truman's and it says in the policies that I've seen, at all costs, the public and the media are not to know. At all costs in government and militaries means terminal death for anybody who breaks this policy. So that's how we came out of World War II. When you look back at the center of World War II being caused by Adolf Hitler, who made public speeches about how he was going to be working with extraterrestrials from Aldebaran and putting these blondes in charge of the Earth, maybe that is what was the context for all of the Eisenhower, Truman, nobody is to know until we understand. And now it is decades later. Lou Elizondo and Steve Justice and Jim Semivan and Hal Puthoff and Kit Green and all of those people who want to understand as much as I do or you do, they have had the difficult razor's edge of doing scientific investigations, military investigations, in which the financial support, for the most part, has come from the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense, by definition, in any country on the planet, keeps everything it's doing as a secret. So that has fed the constant policy of denial. I think that when To the Stars, Louis Elizondo, who did work in the Pentagon, that somebody made a decision, we have got to start laying ground in which we can start opening up some of the truth. So I see it as a positive step. Their TV series on the History Channel is focusing on, ironic to me, Project Blue Book, because I have interviewed at least 3 people who worked either in the CIA or in a military context in the 1950s. And they all 3 told me there was a Project Blue Book that the CIA was controlling. There was a Project Blue Book that was supposed to be an Air Force interface. And there was a real Project Blue Book coming out of Fort Belvoir in Virginia. And that real CIA analysts were seeing real films of real UFOs, of real non-human autopsies, of which there were several done. And that the 3 Project Blue Books are quintessential counter-intel. You get 3 projects, 2 are real. This one goes to the public. That is the same name, but the difference is the 2 that are being controlled by military and intel, you only have a very specific access by numbers and codes. Project Blue Book that was to the public, it was phony. And the man who went into the greatest detail for me about the phoniness of the public Project Blue Book was Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso, the author of The Day After Roswell. And he spoke to me as being a friend as well as an employee to General Arthur Trudeau, who came to the, I guess you would say, that General Eisenhower during World War II, who became president, he said that one of the people that he respected the most was General Arthur Trudeau, the only PhD in chemistry in the United States military was General Arthur Trudeau. General Eisenhower becomes president, and he taps General Arthur Trudeau to be the first head of the investigative unit that the Army would have. And Philip J. Corso said it was because General Eisenhower said to, and President, to General Arthur Trudeau, his respected ally in World War II, the CIA is an enemy. Now, that may seem harsh today, but the insight to the new president, putting General Arthur Trudeau in charge of the first, basically scientific research agency that the Army would have, they trusted the Army because that was their home. That is where they fought in World War II. They didn't trust outside. So when Lieutenant Philip Corso wrote The Day After Roswell, and it is about how General Trudeau, taking orders from General Eisenhower, now President of the United States, in those orders was to all of the retrievals of extraterrestrial technology were to be hand carried to the Pentagon, to General Arthur Trudeau's office in the Pentagon. And that's where Philip J. Corso said he met with the general, is handed and told his assignment will be to hand carry piece by piece extraterrestrial technology. They were not beating around the bush. That was the word that was used. And that General Trudeau, under President Eisenhower's assignment, would be to have one person and one person only, let's say in Lockheed, or Corning Glass. Corning Glass played a very important role, and most people don't know this. And that one person that the general would have had a meeting with, explain why it was vital that it would be absolutely kept close to the vest, and that technology would be transported by Philip J. Corso, handed for that corporation. And this was the goal. This is what explains everything. The best hide would be to get all of these various technologies patented by American corporations. And once that had occurred, then the whole rest of the world could not have access, and the American public could not have access, because it would be patented inside of American corporations.